But how do we make people have freedom of thought and cooperation when we're so vulnerable to divisiveness and following charismatic leaders?
Hello, everybody. John Atack yet again, and with my dear friend, Professor Stephen Moffic, MD. How are you today, Steve?
Pretty good in the midst of all the changes going on in the world around me, but I guess as a psychiatrist, you're taught to stay calm in the midst of chaos. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm trying to do.
Don't panic.
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
Exactly.
And I see you've got your Halloween shirt on.
Yeah, yeah. Halloween's actually one of my favorite days of the year as far as special days.
Mhm.
Maybe it's the favorite because I think it reflects human beings in life, that our own lives are full of tricks and treats. The world's full of tricks and treats. And how do we find more treats than tricks,
Mhm.
both within ourselves and in our relationships and in the world? So that's why I like it so much. And officially, it begins in the United States October 31st,
Mhm.
this Friday. But kids have started trick or treating yesterday on Sunday for, I think, safety reasons, that it's easier for adults to participate and watch them on a Sunday rather than on a Friday. So we have all these trick and treaters out around our neighborhood now, and it was nothing bad happened, which is nice. So
That is good. And in America, it's not often you can say that nothing bad happened. So,
that's right. I mean, especially when there's any sort of public gatherings, so much can go wrong, and
mm,
there's so much conflict. But yeah, so far this has been a pleasurable Halloween, but we still have October 31st to go. So,
yeah, Walpurgisnacht.
and then after that, what also makes it a favorite day of mine is the day after, or the next 2 days actually, are called Day of the Dead or something along those lines. The Hispanic holiday about bringing ancestors back into your life, figuratively, or some people believe literally, but
Mm.
to recognize them and thank them for what they've done. So I like those next 2 days also. It's so that makes this a favorite time.
Yeah, I mean, in the European tradition, it's the night when all of the witches and demons and what have you come out, and then the next day is All Saints' Day, which should be the holiest day of the year because all of the saints are available to us to.
Uh,
So maybe we have to go down to New Orleans for that now and see them come marching in. I don't know.
yeah, really, yeah. Um, it's actually interesting. Um, Maybe there's a connection here, but there's been a lot of attention to the recovery of New Orleans
Mm.
now, like right now, and nothing else probably could provoke that except, again, this sort of tricks or treats in the world. And we have this major hurricane, coming through Jamaica, um, and maybe that's reminding people of New Orleans too. But there's been a lot of retrospective kind of analysis of what happened 20 years ago in New Orleans and the aftermath.
Katrina.
Yeah,
Yeah, just the most devastating thing because one of the historically most important places in the world, New Orleans, just the place that jazz came out of. Um,
yes,
and just that sublime other culture, the Mardi Gras culture, the culture that is part French and part comes out of the African cultures as well, and has given so much to the world. So it's very sad to that Katrina caused such wreckage and havoc to such a historic and significant place.
yeah, exactly. But it also shows kind of how the human spirit can help recovery.
Mm.
City isn't back to what it was, but it still has lots of jazz. It still has this multicultural, really interaction and kind of loving of the surrounding culture, which is so mixed.
Mm.
And so I think it gives us hope in a way,
Mm.
that people can recover from trauma in a positive way. We call that post-traumatic growth or
Yeah.
post-traumatic strength. Doesn't
Yeah.
happen all the time, but it can, whether that's individuals or a city or a country, it's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And we either persist and regenerate. I went to Munich um, many years ago, 30 years ago, and it was the first time I'd been to Germany. And so I had all of my boyhood thing. It's like, don't mention the war, as Basil Fawlty says in Fawlty Towers. Um, and so I was really sort of, we won't, this is Munich. This is where the Nazi Party began. And I arrived there, and my host, a wonderful German psychologist called Dieter Roman, said, yeah, this is where the beer hall bush was. And this is now the thing that was incredible, having, spending 2 or 3 days in Munich, was they'd rebuilt it. And so when you went into the, a Baroque church, it had been completely rebuilt. And to see that they could do it so well that you'd never know. So, that amount of regeneration had happened, that the past had been restored lovingly and carefully. And it's a matter of what is good from the past that we can restore, what has been broken along the way that we can restore, what treats are in store for us in the future by doing so as well.
Yeah, yeah, getting treats out of tricks is really important. And nowadays Nazi Germany and the Holocaust is evoked a lot um, because of the war going on. I suppose that's the major precipitant. But what's
It's to
amazing,
celebrate the fact that I've just issued a book about it, Steve. That's why everybody's interested in it, because they're all rushing out to buy my book.
I hope so. Yeah,
Oh,
your book is a treat, so we'll include that in the
thank you.
tricks or treats. Um, but what's amazing to me is that Germany made peace and cooperation with Israel and with Jews. Jews have gone back there to live. That could hardly be imagined after World War II, that could happen. So again, that shows what people are capable of. I wouldn't necessarily call it forgiveness, but just the practicality that we can work better together. And so that's been amazing. And gives some promise, I think, even for the Middle East, which seems so recalcitrant for getting peace. But there's a chance now. Things are set up potentially to be better.
We live in hope.
Yeah, yeah,
As
hope so. I mean, but hope, one of the, hope is looking positively toward the future, but it requires action. And so, if we look at the war in Gaza now, action has been taken. There's a ceasefire, but will peace come out of that, or will we fall back into the same interactions, between Israel and the surrounding countries? So it's set up for a change, but that doesn't mean that's going to happen yet. So it needs a certain kind of action, for hope to really be realized.
it needs for people to realize, and I do make this point in the new book, that while we aren't actually siblings, we are all cousins. The human race, we now know from DNA, we
Yeah,
all do come from a common origin, and we should be nicer to our cousins and and try and get over the past horrors that have been committed between the ancestors that we will be revering on the Day of the Dead.
but in some ways, being close to people biologically and even culturally is sometimes more difficult than distant relationships. Freud talked about that a lot, the narcissism of small differences. And, again, referring back to the Mideast, the peoples, Jews and Arabs, Islam and Judaism, came out of the same area, came out of the same people. The Jewish origin story in the Torah about Isaac and Ishmael presents all this as a family conflict that was never solved. And we know family conflicts are the hardest to solve. In psychiatry, family therapy is very, very difficult. So you would think because we're closer together historically, we still nowadays look alike. Languages aren't too different, and most people there learn both languages. And but that doesn't make it any easier. In some ways, it makes it harder because the emotions are so strong and so conflictual now. So yeah, people tend to be afraid often of people who are very different. But the emotionality is often more intense when you're dealing with people who you're close to one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, love can turn to hate in close
Very
relationships.
easy.
And
Yeah.
of course, the sheer amount of misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda, in writing Scientology Ruled the World, which of course I'm now going to promote at every possible opportunity. I became interested in the way that the beliefs that we use to rouse hatred among German speakers and to isolate them and create the pretense that they were a separate race, the Aryan race,
Yeah.
that those beliefs, when you dig into them, and I'd never heard this explained, in a life of reading history and a fair amount of books about World War II and the Nazi regime, nobody had explained to me where Aryan race fantasy came from. And the fact
Came
that it,
from inside somebody's heads. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but you can trace it. That was the thing that blew me away, that it's
Yeah.
really easy to trace. It starts in the United States in 1882 with Ignatius Loyola Donnelly, who was a US congressman. And he writes a book called Atlantis, the Lost Continent. And in it, he revives Plato and Herodotus's myth of Atlantis. And that, 6 years later, will be, according to Madame Blavatsky, the founder of Theosophy, and therefore the godmother of 70% of modern cults, this woman, really the Hindu, Buddhist, Rosicrucian, Masonic, Sufi cults that, including Scientology, including the magical cults, they all derive from this woman. She comes up, and I don't think she was a bad person. She comes up with this idea of the Aryan people who had superpowers and lived in Atlantis and fought an aerial war for 1 million years, leaving no trace behind. And it's a fantasy. It doesn't
Yes.
have anything behind it historically. That's in 1888. Within 40 years, less than 40 years, this fairy tale, this myth, will grip a whole people and turn them towards the destruction. I mean, Himmler, who controlled 1.25 million SS troops, he was the second most powerful man in the Third Reich. He wrote an order, and this is before the Holocaust. He wrote an order at the time of the invasion of Russia in 1941 that 30 million Slavs must be killed. So there
Mm.
was this Holocaust of the Slavic peoples, the Russians, the
Mhm.
Poles, the Eastern Europeans, that was being deliberately done for Lebensraum, to give living space for the good German people. And when you dig into it, and this is something else I've never seen anywhere, the Germans absolutely disproved, the Nazis, I should say, absolutely disproved the Aryan race fantasy. They did hundreds of thousands of experiments, measuring people's cranial dimensions was a particular thing. In hundreds of thousands of cases, they checked calf muscles, blood types, fingerprints, ear sizes. And there were horrific collections that were put together. People were murdered to collect their skeletons. And the end
Mhm.
of all of this research was never published. I've published it. The end of all this research is they
Good for you.
couldn't tell the difference between racial types.
Yeah, because it's mainly psychological and sociological. It's
Yeah,
not
skin color, eye
biological.
color, hair color.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's more variation between groups of human beings. Sorry, there's more variation within groups of human beings than there is between groups of human beings. So they couldn't tell a Mediterraneanoid, as they called the Italians, from an Aryan, from a Teuton. But they also found in one of the studies, 11% of the Jews they checked had blonde hair and blue eyes. So now we have genetics and we can say, no, it's all nonsense, that we've all got, like it or not, Aborigine genes, Neanderthal genes, Denisovan genes. This is the new one. They're having fun with that. So we are cousins. And, we should, it'd be better to be kissing cousins than fighting cousins, all in all.
Yeah, kissing cousins is a good description. I think somehow the world's leadership needs to emphasize this commonality that we're kind of all earthlings. I think when we identify ourselves culturally, like Black American or whatever, it's usually an ethnic or religious identification, but it leaves out maybe the most important of all, that we're part of this global population that's closely related. So to try to emphasize that, so people will keep that in mind, and that we actually depend on each other, and it's much easier for us to potentially kill each other, and destroy the world now. So we better do this soon. So it takes a whole, I think, orientation of who we all are as individuals, that there's much more than our ethnicity, our religion. There's this global connection that we've had historically and still have today. So a big task, but the best leaders will be able to help us along the way if we can find them and reinforce them.
Yeah, I mean, my friend Archelev has recently published a book about tyrants, and he was the guy who developed courageous followership, which has been taught throughout the US military. I think more than 1 million people have been given these ideas to say you are responsible for what you do. And there are ways of getting a leader to listen rather than just kowtowing and doing as you're told. And we've not been tremendously good at it. He also gave us intelligent disobedience, the idea that children should be taught to ask questions and say no if they don't understand or don't want to do something, instead of obedience. And our educational systems are still obedience training for the most part, not all of them, but for the most part, about acquiring information that will probably be of no use to you whatsoever. And within this system, we're told that there's a decline in intelligence now happening since the year 2000. There is a decline in intelligence, and there are all sorts of excuses being made about this. Social media is being blamed. Cell phones are being blamed. The research that I've seen, and I've been interested in it throughout this time, doesn't actually support that. I think that the reason we're seeing a decline is our educational system. And I think that we're seeing a decline in our educational system because of our political systems. And it's not a matter of throwing money at education. It's a matter of finding different ways of teaching people and teaching compassion, teaching that if we didn't have to throw away so much money on weapons and artillery shells, we could feed everybody. We could have a healthcare system for everybody. It is the fact of war that is in the way of human progress. And that comes out of hubris and vanity and unresolved trauma in childhood and anger and all of this stuff. Things that we can deal with. We do know how to do it. And we're doing exactly the wrong things. So somebody was in touch with me about the horrors of the prison system. And it made me think about, there was a home for juvenile offenders called Pepper Harrow in Britain in the early 1970s. And there's this wonderful documentary about it. And they went back 20 years later and they found 4 of the 6 kids and got them to talk. And this was, I mean, you've got an 8-year-old wandering around smoking a cigarette. That this was like this bunch of hippies are looking after these kids. And their recidivism, their reoffence rate was 10%. Then in 1979-80, William Whitelaw in this country brings in what he called the short, sharp shock. Now, I think that's a very unfortunate idea to be quoting from The Mikado by Gilbert and Sullivan about executing people, short,
Right.
sharp shock. And the recidivism rate in the children who were bullied and unloved went up from 10% to 80%. So
Mm.
that we've now got prisons, corrections institutions, as they're called in the US, where they're just hot housing gangs. They're just teaching how to be a sociopath, how to be brutal. And there's a whole system saying, yeah, let's punish them, let's punish them. We'll make them regret it. And then you release them back into society, and society finds out what actually happens when you brutalize people, when you don't treat them with respect, when they can't read and write, which is frequently the case. About 50% of our prisoners can't, they're illiterate. Or when you're functionally
Yeah.
illiterate and you can read the words off the page, but you don't know what they mean. And that's about
Yeah.
a failure in
Well,
education.
yeah, I was a psychiatrist part-time in a men's medium security prison in the United States, and our prison system is horrendous. But as you've alluded to, there are ways to make it better. What I found out in the prison I worked in was that the population was overrepresented by young Black Americans,
Yeah.
no surprise. But they weren't sociopaths for the most part, even though they were labeled and stuff.
No.
They were suffering from PTSD.
And they're being
And
trained to be
if you
sociopaths within that system.
Yeah, so if you could get them to trust you and talk about the traumas they went through with life, they actually got better. And what also had to be done, you alluded to, is you don't want to return them to the same situation, to the
Yeah.
same neighborhood where there's gangs and drugs and stuff. So you've got to help them to find a new place to live and to grow. Um, but 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 these aren't bad people, if they get out without treatment, or without a new place to live and grow, yeah, there's going to be the same recidivism. Why wouldn't there be? I mean, it'd be foolish to think that anything has changed. So yeah, we have a horrendous prison system. It's probably going to get worse. Um, why will it get worse, or why is it getting worse? Because now it's even privatized instead of being
Yeah.
public. And when it's privatized, you build in the profit motive, the same way we built in the profit motive into healthcare. So, our healthcare system has as many tricks in it as treats nowadays, because it's basically a business operation, not a healthcare operation in terms of ethics. So, but we also know how to fix those things too. But, other priorities are now in place in the United States anyways. So, and of
Yeah,
course, our
we need a
current,
ballroom. I think that all the
Hmm?
world's problems will be solved by having a ballroom that looks as if it's twice the size of the White House. And then somebody's going to show him the plans of the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, and he's going to go, this is tiny. I want to take the whole of Washington, D.C., just as Nero did with Rome, and rebuild it so that it's bigger than the Hermitage. And then somebody's going to show him the Vatican City, and he's going to go, well, this is tiny, it's got to be bigger. And then somebody's going to say, you can fit the Vatican City into Angkor, 4 times over. And it's going to be, let's rename the country, let's call it Trumperica, and we'll have, stretching from coast sea to shining sea, we'll have a ballroom. What on earth is happening?
Yeah. Well, the idea is, that more and more power is being consolidated and potentially could lead to military law, and not only a third term of presidency, but presidency
Permanent.
for life. And
Absolutely. And
and
when the
and so
architecture.
our marches, and maybe you had this in Great Britain too. I know some other countries participated. This No King's March we had, 10 days ago or something
Yeah.
like that.
7 million
It
people.
sounded good. There were estimates of 7 million people in the United States in different cities. It was peaceful. But the question is whether that'll make any difference. Now, one of the things I thought was missing, as we just mentioned, is who's the leader of this movement that's going to get people inspired more than they are right now. And I think without some leadership developing, I I think these will be a drop in the bucket and not just make people feel good for participating, but not really change things. And they have those rallies have drawbacks too, because when the presidential administration feels humiliated, they just come back stronger. So I'm not sure how much good these no king response to the increasing autocracy, and I don't think all that effective so far. So it's quite frightening here, you know.
But
Again,
what do you think would be effective?
well, I think there needs to be a leader or leaders um, that have the kind of leadership that will help, meaning they have to be charismatic in their own ways, but emphasize different values. Like you brought up compassion,
Mm.
um, tolerance for people, bringing people together instead of dividing them, finding out why so many people in the United States who were traditionally Democrats have moved to the Republican side, and fulfill what they need, because that's why they moved, because they were being unintended to. So, you know, it needs to be, I think there's a term for this kind of leadership, transformative leadership. And, but you can't just have a bunch of separate rallies and not anybody to kind of lead you. I think people aren't capable of these large scale developments on their own. I think they have big limits, and nobody has come out of and grabbed people's attention as far as leadership goes. Certainly not in the Democratic Party. I mean, maybe somebody will come out of that, or maybe it's somebody who doesn't have a political background. It's like people like Gandhi came out to be able to change most everything in India, um, hopefully for the better, although he had to sacrifice in a way himself
Well,
in
of
the
course,
process.
he was against separatism, and separatism proved to be a terrible, terrible. You know, perhaps 2 million people died in the first year there. So
Yeah,
it what Gandhi and Nehru tried to do didn't work and hasn't worked. India now is a populist right wing country ruled
yeah,
by a religious belief.
I was just going to get to that too. Yeah, India
Yeah.
is taking a turn for the worse,
Mm.
unfortunately. But there too, it's the kind of leader who grabbed onto the population. You know this better than me. It's kind of setting up this cultish kind of
Mm.
following,
Yeah.
and when you do
The
that,
BJP.
you can stay entrenched for a long time. So a country that had so much promise, but also so much human need has turned in a different direction now. I always admired India since I've been working on these books about religions
Mm.
and psychiatry, because the and as you probably know, our second edition of Islamophobia and Psychiatry is on its way to
Mm.
being published now, hopefully, thankfully. But the prior book on the Eastern traditions and spirituality,
Mm.
um, what we found out, some of us who worked on the chapter about Hinduism kind of confirmed that basically Hinduism has been probably the best other religion that didn't try to emphasize anti-Semitism. And
Yeah, you and I
why
disagree on that, and I've named the Hindu anti-Semites to you in the past. Um,
yeah, well, I suggest everybody read the chapter on that in the book. I think compared to other religions, Hinduism has been a blessing as far as Jews have been concerned. Now, that doesn't mean that's going to continue now when you have an autocratic leader who uses Hinduism for other purposes. But the two religions, Judaism and Hinduism, seem to develop separately, um, but both seem to have some emphasis on tolerance.
it,
And
it,
and of all the religions, the ones nowadays that supports Judaism
mm,
in the United States is Hinduism. Um, maybe Buddhism, if you can call that a religion, I'm not sure. But you know, we aren't doomed to not be able to support each other, even when we've come from these great different backgrounds. In psychiatry, probably my closest allies are Hindu psychiatrists. They seem to have a much more open response to what's happening, say, in the Middle East, instead of an automatic, well, I'm for this side or I'm for that side. That's not very helpful. But
Mm.
so, yeah, I know we disagree some about this, but from my personal experience, Hindu psychiatrists are the best for me to work with, other than, well, it's even better often than fellow Jews,
Mm.
because Jewish people disagree lots of times with each other. It's a strength, but also a great weakness. So anyways, that's my spiel.
Yeah, and
Yes.
I mean to comment on those points and air that disagreement, we might as well. Um, Anti-Semitism in India, Savitri Devi, a book called Hitler's Priestess by Professor Nicholas Goodrick Clark, details the involvement of Savitri Devi and her husband as spies against the British during World War II, and also as Savitri Devi massively promoted the idea that Hitler was an incarnation of Vishnu. This was taken up. The current ruling party, actually has its own equivalent of the Hitler Youth, which was formed based upon Mussolini's original of the fascist youth, but then was refined in the 30s to follow. The current premier of India is still a member of that group. So you also, as I've pointed out to you, if you go throughout India, one of the most popular brands of ice cream is Hitler ice cream. And you see pictures of Hitler in full regalia with the swastika being advertised throughout India. I would make the point there are very few Jews in India, so anti-Semitism there has not risen to this thing. But we do have marches now regularly in India that's where Hindu nationalists chant, "Kill all non-believers." We also have the Pink Revolution, where Muslims are being killed because it's asserted that they eat holy cows. So that there is a foment there. But I'd also like to say that the comparison between Hinduism and Judaism, or the idea that Hinduism is a religion, is simply not true. Hinduism is a group of hundreds of religions which are labeled by outsiders as Hinduism. But at one end, you'll find, for example, the Thugi cult, who were worshippers of Kali, and they would call themselves Hindus. Their religious practice was to murder people on the streets, and they murdered thousands of people until the British Raj stopped them. So you have a really complicated question as to whether it's a national group or a religious group. And of course, this same problem in defining Judaism. Is it an ethnicity? Is it a religion? 40% of
Both.
his
Both.
40% of Israelis are not religious. And
Yeah,
yet,
it's
so
both.
yeah, so
They're
to
not mutually exclusive. I think in general, I'm not an expert about religions, but to qualify for a religion, you have to have a deity you believe in. And
traditionally
that's what,
that's been overturned in law, Steve, in the last 40 years. So Buddhism is recognized as a religion, although technically it has no deity, though they do worship
oh,
bodhisattvas and what have you.
Hinduism?
Yeah,
Yeah, Hinduism has
but
a
no,
deity.
Buddhism. That was the
Oh,
example you gave.
Buddhism, from my
So
point of view, would not qualify as a religion.
legally it does, and
Oh,
in
yeah,
this country,
but
there's a ruling supporting its religious rights, and they've accepted that. I would agree that it shouldn't be, but as a former Buddhist, it absolutely is a religion because the Buddha is worshipped. So whether and is considered a supernatural being. So it becomes a semantic matter to me. These belief systems which have supernaturalism in them, I think it's fair to call them religions. With Judaism is not a religion. 40% of Israelis are atheists. They have the highest rate of atheism of any country in the world, but they will say, I'm a Jew. So the identity of being a Jew is not religious. It's purely an ethnic thing, which has within it a variety of factions of religion, from the Haredi and the Lubavitch through to the Reformed, all of these factions who
Well,
identify as an imaginary community. It's not real. It's an imaginary community. They imagine themselves to be part of it when they're not at war with one another over their beliefs. Hinduism
well,
is way more complicated than Judaism in those terms, because you have people who believe exactly the opposite. You have people who believe that killing people is the sacrament, as the Thugis did, and they were a major movement. And you have people who believe that sacrificing themselves, to the wheels of the juggernaut, the idol of Krishna at Puri, people whose religion is to commit suicide by throwing themselves under the wheels. So you don't have something like the Christian church, which is, fairly similar ideas. You don't even have common scriptures between Hindu groups. You have, say, the Upanishads among the forest sages that came from the forest sages. You have the Vedas. These scriptures, unlike the Mahabharata, with Jews, you have the Torah, the Old Testament to Christians, and the New Testament, and that's a canon. There is no canon within Hinduism. So Western scholars, for convenience, call it a religion, but it's in fact many religions, some of which are anti-Semitic, some of which are anti anything that isn't their particular sect of Hinduism, as bad as, neo-Nazis in America. And this is based upon my experience. This is based upon my study. I'm confident of these assertions. So we generalize a group. We say this is what white people are like, or this is what black people are like, this is what Jews are like, this is what Hindus are like. I think those are groupings where there's so much variation that
yeah, well,
the thought is
stereotyping,
dangerous. Yeah,
yeah,
stereotyping. Yeah,
stereotyping people is very problematic.
yeah.
But I think we're coming from different points of view. I'm coming back to you about Hinduism as far as my own personal experience with patients who are Hindus of various kinds, psychiatrists, travels and so forth, and they've been much more receptive to Judaism than people from other religions. That's probably a different perspective than you have from knowing all these variations within Hinduism. But the whole challenge is, how do we emphasize what's similar between the
Yeah.
religions and complementary? It's like in Judaism, there's this, from a religious standpoint, and I agree with you, many Jews are not religious, but there's this idea that we were chosen for certain tasks in life called ethical monotheism. Well, that's problematic if you think you're better because of that
The
designation,
chosen people. Yeah.
yeah, than other religions. So at best, to make that more equivalent, what are the different religions' contributions to the well-being of humanity? I think that's what's really important to emphasize. Not that one religion has the answers or is better than another religion. What does each religion potentially contribute to our well-being, and how do we isolate that and emphasize that instead of its, detrimental beliefs and culture? So, yeah, so all that stuff in Hinduism that you mentioned that's problematic for the well-being of humans, how do we overcome that? To me, that's the big task that we have in the world today. And of course, I would include atheists and agnostics in that. They have their own values and beliefs that are very variable, but some of them may be terrific as far as the well-being of humans, and some not. And again, how do we? You're terrific in pointing out, our vulnerabilities and how we can fall into traps, so to speak, psychological traps. And but how do we do the opposite? Make people have freedom of thought and cooperation when we're so vulnerable to divisiveness and, when following charismatic leaders. So just, it's, I guess that's again why I like this holiday so much, Halloween, because it makes me think of both sides of our problems, what we're good at and what we're not so good at as human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's coming to some common agreement and putting aside, notions of religion, atheism, agnosticism, and saying those people whose beliefs focus upon the preservation of humanity, of human life, and regard all people as having a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That that where I see that, I applaud it. Unfortunately, divisiveness can rise up. It can be a political cause like fascism, but it others people, and I think it's wherever that happens, wherever
Yeah,
it's like, my God's better than your God, or my belief is right. I I I do read a great deal of material about religion. I'm currently reading this book, rereading it actually. I read it a long time ago. Robert Graves and Raphael Patai,
oh,
Hebrew Myths, the Book of Genesis. Now, this is a deeply scholarly study of the books of Genesis, showing largely later midrash and interpretations within the Jewish faith of the meaning of these things. And what fascinates me is that when we take any religious story and it's elevated, it's a distinction that I think, what is called Pesher in Judaism, that these are stories that are to be interpreted, discussed, and talked about. Then in Christianity, you had the rise at the end of the 18th, beginning of the 19th century, of what is called fundamentalism. In Islam, we've had the rise of fundamentalism called Wahhabism or Salafi belief within the Sunni, as opposed to the Shiites. They have their own versions, where what you're saying is, no, this is all literally true. When it says Joshua made the sun stand still, that's true. And you're going, well, everybody would have gone flying off the planet if he'd made the sun stand still. And we see preserved all sorts of Bronze Age fairy stories, mythology that is not true, and where one interprets that and says, well, yeah, but this is a moral story. This is teaching us, that when Jonah's swallowed by the whale, it's teaching us something about our hauteur, or, our, you know,
right.
and sometimes, unfortunately, those stories have been changed. And of course, with the discovery of Babylonian, Hittite, Ugaritic, and Sumerian texts, we know the origins of most of Torah. And we know that the stories changed and adapted to fit with the view of God that people have. Not because God came along and said, no, you're doing it the wrong way, but because man reformed the imagination of God. One could say that, man is in the image of God, man is in the imagination of God. And what's happened is that man has imagined God, and imagined a God that is destructive, imagined a God that is vengeful. I mean, the Old Testament does say all evil comes from the Lord. And people then become obsessed with hurting other people because they have this idea that they're somehow following some kind of holy writ that says you've got to hurt other people. So we find, in World War One, the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Pope were blessing the artillery. And it's like, where have we got to? This guy's called the Prince of Peace. So coming down to a fundamental that says, if your religion says, be kind, treat other people with dignity, I'm for it. I don't care what it's called. If your religion says, as I say, with the Pink Revolution in India, or the Gujarat massacre, which Modi oversaw, 2,000 Muslims murdered because he took the police off the streets for 3 days. This is horrific. This isn't, and it's cloaked as religion. And of course, much of my work has been about Scientology, which has the protections of religion. Now, I know how it became a religion, and as Professor Hugh Urban in his book, Scientology, A New Religion, points out, it pretends to be a religion. It finds out how you're meant to look like a religion so it can get tax exemption. And
Yeah,
around
right,
about page 210, he points out it's not a religion. And you go, well, why is the book called A New Religion then?
right.
but but a very good book, by the way. But so I've seen how pseudo religion is generated, and I've studied many groups where you can see that the person who started the group is a charlatan. They're a con artist, or they're deluded. They're crank. Madame Blavatsky, taking her work apart, it's not true. What she says about the past is not true. You can disprove it. What she predicted for the future has not happened, and yet she's influenced the whole. I think she had as much influence as Freud and Jung, or as Marx probably. That
Mm.
and it's not really been seen that the way we think, simple things, the way that in Halloween people think about ghosts. This is a 19th century thing. This view of ghosts. It comes out of largely the spiritualist movement in the 1840s, and this idea that the dead are still among us. It was actually forbidden in Christianity by Augustine, city of God, what have you. So Christians believe that if you see it at that time, and it was doctrine for centuries, if you see a ghost, it's a demon. It's not the spirit of a human being, because scripture says that there are no wandering spirits of human beings. We have, step by step. It's like the way Robin Hood was created in Hollywood by Errol Flynn, and people come to see this. Oh yeah, where was Robin Hood? It's like he didn't exist. King Arthur didn't exist. They're fairy stories that are then built upon. And I fear that that building upon is so much an aspect of religious belief, saying rather than having the sensible idea of Peshar, that we will talk about this, we'll think about what it means, and we'll give our different opinions, and nobody will beat us up for disagreeing. You get to the thing, well, you have to believe this, and if you don't believe this, well, we're going to burn you
Well,
at the stake, obviously.
well, it sounds like you're talking about our current government in the United States. I
I'd
mean,
never do that.
which, which, if it has religious underpinnings, that's only a fantasy. It's a power play, and people are vulnerable to easy solutions, promises that their needs are going to be fulfilled in a way that's much easier for people than to think in the way we hope people can think, with more freedom of thought, being comfortable with ambiguity and contradiction. But it's much easier to believe in leadership, whether that's a god in a religion or a tyrant. It both both play upon people's vulnerabilities, and that's what I think our challenges in the United States. How do we keep a democracy alive, a democracy where we know people's health and mental health needs are better served than in an autocracy. And so because the United States is so influential in the world, this is a worldwide challenge. It's not just within the United States. So, hopefully leaders will emerge that can direct us in a different way. I don't think the public can do this on their own. We're just too vulnerable.
No,
Um,
and I mean, Bernie Sanders did a wonderful interview with Jon Stewart last week, and which won't be last week by the time this video goes up. Sorry about that. See if we can find a link to it. And he pointed out that it's not in the interests of the Democrat Party, of course, he's an independent, it's not in the interests of the Democrat Party to stand up and change things because their funding's coming from the pharmaceutical corporations as well. And it's something that's been tried in many countries again and again that the funding for political parties should come from government. There should not be super PACs. This
right,
idea this guy is offered to pay $130 million to the troops, so that
right,
which is they can't legally, he can't. Congress has to disperse the funds. But I think Sanders made a very vital point that we need a complete rethink. That having Chuck Schumer, taking over from Nancy Pelosi, these awful, thin, people who've got nothing to I mean, thin in their reasoning, not their size. I'm not going to fat shame them. You couldn't fat shame Nancy Pelosi if you tried. But Newsom, Chef, that I'm looking at as an outsider and saying, I don't believe you. I don't think you have solutions. I think you are just an opposition. And
Yeah,
because of
I think that's true. Yeah.
yeah, and so we have the the Green New Deal, which makes sense. AOC and various people pushing to say we have to look after the environment, we have to
Yeah.
look after the people, and that's then labeled as socialism by undoubtedly by people who don't know the meaning of the word socialism, which is a 19th century word, which means making sure that everybody has enough. It was a word that was in fact cultured within the German Empire by Bismarck. It's not communist. It doesn't mean, everybody gets to share everything. It means for everyone there's enough. And that's now a bad thing. And being liberal, wanting to free things, that's a bad thing. And we now, of course, have Republicans' emails and tweets coming out about how much they love Hitler and having Nazi streaks and things like this, with
Yeah.
a complete ignorance of what Hitler did. With this new story that there was no Holocaust, 27 million Slavs were not murdered.
Hmm.
That he was actually a nice man who was very good to dogs and a vegetarian. That these horrors are being pushed aside. I fear that we have something new rising up as a religion that's already taken over and is a much more powerful religion. And that's the religion of artificial intelligence. And the idea in Silicon Valley that's been going on for 30 years now, that if you can just get these computers to form a singularity, to all get together, you will have created a God that will rule us. And we're what Amazon this week have announced 500,000 job layoffs, 500,000 because of AI. In the next 2 years, it's reckoned that 20% more people will be unemployed. We are racing towards catastrophe because at the other end, you have this view of these scroungers, these people on welfare. And we're going back to policies that happened in the United States and started in the United States. The first sterilization law in history was in Connecticut in the 1890s, long before Hitler. And in fact, the first sterilization laws in Germany were long before Hitler, and they were supported by the Christian and the Jewish communities.
Yeah.
This idea that you sterilize people and you'll get rid of these, what life unworthy of life, as the Nazis called it. And I think we are moving, and so I've written a book because I think it's really important to understand that fantasies can lead, a 250,000 schizophrenics were either killed or sterilized by the Nazis.
Yeah. Well,
Schizophrenia, let's get into the science of it. Schizophrenia is worse in Germany now than in other European countries. So it didn't work. It's not a practical solution, but people grab these simple ideas and go, well, if we just sent all of the Latinos away, if we just sent all of the black people away, then we'd have all these lovely white people to do what exactly, And I think, watching the billionaires, Bernie Sanders said this great thing, and I put it on my Facebook page. $1 billion is enough. And I've been saying this for the last couple of years too. $1 billion is enough. People have this enormous power. A man
yeah.
who's wetting himself because he takes so much ketamine and funding Trump and governing aspects of the economy. Democracy does not mean being at the mercy of plutocrats. The swamp is the billionaires. It's the people who have power over us and have taken democracy away from us. And in a very short time, could actually rule the world. They're very
Yeah.
close.
Well,
Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, these people.
well, yeah, especially if they control AI. You know,
Which they
AI,
do. There are only 5
AI is
corporations
so
developing it.
powerful and limits people's ability to think so much, and even causes now psychosis and suicide in some people because they believe they're talking to a person who knows, who can lead them to do what's needed. Yeah, AI is a tremendous danger. And whether it'll turn out to be a treat depends on how it's used and whether it'll be used to develop, again, better ways of relating instead of just, as it's doing now, just putting together material that's out there in a way that's hasn't been helpful in the past and won't be helpful now, but it controls people, like AI may be the biggest cult to develop that's ever existed.
It's the new religious movement, and it's also a fraud. Artificial general intelligence hasn't been achieved. A massive survey published a couple of weeks ago said that 1/3 of all of the answers generated by AI were wrong. I mean, I've checked it frequently using information I know. The first thing I asked, when ChatGPT came out, because I was working on Charles Manson, I said, what was Charles Manson's grandmother's religion? And it gave me the wrong answer. And it's it's built into the programs that they've got to give you an answer. Microsoft admitted, they hallucinate.
Or maybe somewhere in what's been published, somebody said that, and AI just grabbed onto it because it's already out there.
Exactly. I mean,
as if it was true. Yeah.
And there's another danger in this current book, and I use AI, I don't mind using it. There were certain aspects of Aleister Crowley, the sex magician. There were certain out of whom Scientology comes, and many, many other modern groups. There were certain aspects of his teaching that I wanted to check, and they're things I've read, so I know they're there, but I've read so much. So I checked with AI, and it wouldn't tell me. It would tell me this is the answer to the question. But when I said, what is the source for that? It was very, and what on earth is this? And you kind of go, you made it up, didn't you? And so getting to this point where the singularity it's teleological. That is to say, it is created to become God. It's what the end will be. And where you're looking at large language models as they can be used in surgery, for example, and in medicine, there are phenomenal benefits in genetics, incredible things that can be done because they can crunch numbers that much more quickly. But when you look at directing the human population, I think there are some unfortunate things that have not been worked out. One of them is, if you were a supreme intelligence and you had all of the information that is available, who would you say were the most life-damaging individuals in the human race? Would you say it's the dole scrounger, this person who's, living off the state and taking, I don't know, maybe $30,000 a year? Or would you say it's the billionaire? Which one of them is causing more damage? Have the politicians realized that their jobs will be the first to go? It's not just cab drivers. It's going to be lawyers. We're going to have robocops. We can actually, and then do we get a Terminator scenario where this thing says, well, actually, human beings are really awful. Let's get rid of them. Let's get breed the pigs until they become intelligent, because they seem quite nice in comparison.
I mean, not only can AI probably potentially do that, but again, somebody who's in control of AI could want to do that to increase their power and get rid of any sort of opposition. So, the risk is immense, and so far we haven't found good ways to control that better and help the public in dealing with AI instead of it's kind of
there's no plan for the future. We're going to have massive unemployment, and there's no plan. People are not being trained to occupy themselves in any other way than being wage slaves, as it has been going. And we are looking into a dark mirror. We can't see what's going to happen, and people don't want to think about it.
No, it's easier not to, and people are at risk for becoming like intellectual slaves. It's like unable to think for themselves, other than to press a button to try to get AI to do whatever for them. As you said, it has great potential in other ways, but those are circumscribed, and even those ways need to be double and triple checked. When AI puts together a diagnosis for a complicated patient, they may or may not be right. And if you just assume they're right, you're going to run into trouble. So you still need the humans to reassess what they're learning from AI and not just accept it on the surface.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a fundamental truth that really needs to be thought about. AI is a military tool. It is
Oh,
being
yeah,
developed
yeah.
by 5 corporations in the West and China. Now, we don't know what Russia's doing. And it's absolutely, as with nearly everything, the World Wide Web, the internet, these are things, well, the web came along after, but the internet is a military tool. That's what
Yeah.
it was developed for. And of course, all of these things have proved to be intelligence tools that now intelligence agencies can monitor what we're doing. They can switch our cell phones on, as Snowden pointed out, and use them as microphones. They don't need to bug things anymore if they're interested in you. And in a state, we've seen the fear with China that you monitor people. I mean, this country here in the UK, we have more camera monitoring on the streets
Mm,
than anywhere else. The
mm.
Chinese have the cameras, but they're not actually plugged in. Aha! Very cunning, the Chinese. Just put one on the
Big brother,
lamppost and people will be terrified.
big
But
brother is here somewhere. Yeah.
yeah, and people actually, when they switch their Alexa or their Siri or their Cortana on, they don't necessarily understand there's a microphone in the room that's recording everything you do. And these things have 10 years ago. I
Mhm.
wrote a piece called Little Sister is Listening to You, because 10 years ago, there was a case where the FBI got records of one of these things, which actually there was a murder. And fair enough. But Orwell will be kind of going, so you've paid for a service that actually records every sound in your house to a database that can be searched so that if at any point ever in the future,
Mhm.
and then seeing how intelligence, the Kafkaesque way in which intelligence can be mishandled, or reading John le Carre and finding out what the intelligence agencies are really like, that this is a terrible demonic weapon that people they go, oh, but it's so convenient. I can make my shopping list,
Mhm.
you know.
Mhm.
So the psychological enslavement's already happened, and here
Mhm.
we are.
Yes.
So trick or treat.
Yeah, I mean, like most innovations, usually they have the potential for as many tricks as treats. And what we do with innovations is what's going to make the difference. And yeah, AI is developing so fast and in the control really of so few people, it seems like, at least in the United States, that um, I'm seeing more tricks than treats so
Yes,
far.
Starlink, Palantir, these massive surveillance systems that have been put in place. When Elon Musk was allowed to go in and steal the records of all Americans without having any actual government position, and
No,
nobody stopped him.
and he has all these satellites, which are
Starlink, yeah.
so potentially important for peace or war. Um,
Well, when the use of them was taken away from Ukraine for just 3 days, it caused
mhm.
absolute devastation. You're going, these people have too much power. A democracy is not a situation where you have, what, 500 people in charge of 8 billion people. That's not democracy.
Right.
It's a pretense, and it's something, what we can do about it is be aware, first off, and be a little bit more cautious about how the way that people went onto Facebook, so that by the time Aggregate IQ and Cambridge Analytica came along, they are the same thing. They said that for the uh, Brittany Kaiser in her book, who sold Cambridge Analytica to Trump, she's the woman that actually did it, and she's saying, well, Facebook had sold its entire database to between 40 and 45,000 corporations by the time there's any restriction. And they had 5,000 pieces of information, data points, they call it, on every adult in the United States, whether you'd ever been on Facebook or not, because if you're mentioned or if there's a photograph of you that somebody's put up, so you go, so this intelligence agency called Facebook, which and
Oh,
Mark Zuckerberg's gone on the stand and sworn to Congress that he wasn't giving material to China. And then a few years later, he's gone on the stand and sworn that he was,
yeah,
which is treason. And nobody thought to go, oh, that's treason, isn't it? You're selling material to the Chinese intelligence services about Americans,
yeah,
and you're still one of the 500 people running the world.
yeah.
So the land of topsy-turvy.
Yeah, and unfortunately, my broader field of psychology has contributed to getting people addicted to Facebook
Mm,
and, other social media. It's knowing that was one of the reasons I never participated in Facebook.
mm,
Although what you said is also true that I'm probably there in different ways, but I decided not to participate in any of that stuff, that it was too dangerous. And this whole idea of having friends on Facebook is so phony.
mm.
These aren't friends.
No.
Maybe acquaintances
Mm,
that could be good or bad for you, but to
mm.
call all these people connected to you as friends is absurd and self-deluding. So I have
Absolutely.
major concerns about social media, but not much I can do to help stop that other than to call out the risks, where I can. But
Mm.
I think it's been very dangerous, and has inhibited people from more real life personal interactions. Very nice. You could say the same thing about Facebook as far as, well, there's some good aspects of it. I would not be able to communicate with people in other places the way I can now because of social media. Even doing this with you,
Yeah.
it's great. It has these positive aspects, but if I take it all together, I think there's much more negative tricks that people have fallen into with social media.
Yeah, we don't understand it. Why don't we round up on the subject of tricking or treating and let these poor people go and have their dinner or whatever it is they've been waiting to do. Why are you
Yeah,
watching this? Why are you doing this to yourselves? It's
yeah. Maybe that was a natural time to have a break, a stop.
yeah, could well be.
Yeah,
Um, I think, I think we've roamed far and wide as we always do from a simple topic. It's always fascinating. You're one of the people I love to disagree with because you're just not a disagreeable person.
oh, thank you.
And I do so believe that to be able to disagree agreeably is fundamental, and that's
Oh,
where we go wrong,
that's so important. I talk to other groups a lot, and when they tend to be one side or the other
Yeah.
politically and religiously and so on. I said, what's really what's really wonderful about human beings is we can learn from one another, but we don't learn from one another if we're too critical, condescending, and angry at the other.
Mm,
They're not going to teach you if that's what you convey. You
mm,
need to convey interest, um, curiosity, respect, and then you can learn from one another and maybe even work together.
mm.
So yeah, I'm not going to put myself out as a model there, but it's like that. I try to do that because I really do think it's important to be open to other people's ideas as much as I might disagree with them
Mm.
or misunderstand them or whatever. So yeah, I think the way to relate to one another is also a big challenge because it's easy to get angry and condescending, and that doesn't lead anywhere except for actually making things worse. So
Yeah, I agree, and it can be very difficult. A few years ago, a friend of mine said that he didn't believe that the Holocaust had happened. And he pointed out to me that I lost my temper with him, and he didn't find that helpful. And it, but I then spent 3 days looking through the Nuremberg trial records to say, you know, yeah, the people that did it say it happened.
Yeah,
Rudolf,
they had meticulous records. Yeah, it's like,
many of which were destroyed, but
yeah,
it's true that. But Rudolf Höss, who was the first camp commandant at Auschwitz, when he was asked if he had killed, executed 1.25 million Jews, he said yes, executed and exterminated. Now, and then his deputy came up and said the same. And actually, he hadn't killed 1.25 million. His numbers were a bit lower than that. So that was untruthful of him. But that use of the word exterminated, and then you get, oh, well, they were tortured to say that. And in a couple of years' time, AI is going to be able to completely rewrite all of the records of human history, change all of the photographs of human history.
good
And
point. Yeah, potential. Yeah,
what's going to be true? And if by then we haven't taught children how to think, and we aren't teaching them now,
right.
and I've started. I got 3 courses underway, and I can't make money doing it, and I have to make money to live. And so I've got courses that could go into schools that 11-year-olds could see, that would show them how to spot human predators, for example. And it's not that difficult seeing that somebody is a predator, seeing that somebody is trying to sell you something, somebody's trying to get you on board. Oh, wow, you look great today, Steve. What a fantastic shirt. Just
Feels good.
flattery will start it.
Hmm.
But how propaganda and fake news works, these are things that to me are pretty straightforward. Google a few years ago put out this thing about how you could spot if something was fake news, and it was the biggest pile of fetid dingo's kidneys, to use Douglas Adams' term. There are very straightforward ways. We don't teach them, and
Right.
still we can. I think we have all of the necessary tools,
Yeah.
but we don't know how to use them because we find it very hard. Inertia is such a thing with human beings. Once we're moving in a particular direction, we'll keep moving in that direction. So when you point out that there's something wrong, you'll have to go through a massive battle to get it changed because, well, it's the way we do things now. And
Yeah.
it's as if it was, look at the changes in the scientific perception of drugs, of street drugs. That cannabis, now we have studies that show that it's as effective as the opioids for pain, but doesn't have the addictive or withdrawal problems that you have with those things. There was a massive study in Canada a couple of years ago. There's just been another one. And you kind of go, so why don't we use it? Well, it's illegal. It's like, well, hang on a minute. It appears to be, the British Medical Association said it's the safest drug they've ever dealt with. That's, the American Medical Association desperately tried to get it re-legalized, and people don't know this because, when President Nixon did his war on drugs, and it went from, if you smoke a spliff, you'll get a night in jail, to 3 spliffs and you're out. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison. So what happened was a belief was manipulated about this substance, which is most certainly not as dangerous as alcohol, which is held to be the most dangerous of all of the drugs we use.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and to shift that belief, and you go, well, hang on a minute, why did cannabis become illegal? And you go, well, it happened like this. In 1923, the Mandate of Egypt, still controlled by the British, but the Mandate of Egypt went to the newly formed League of Nations and said, we want to make this drug criminal. And the League of Nations voted no. The next year, 1924, the Canadian Parliament discussed the findings in a novel called The Black Candle, which said that if you gave cannabis to white women, they would miscegenate with black men.
Hmm.
That's why cannabis was made illegal in Canada. I'm happy to
Hmm.
say that they were the second country in the world to legalize it as well. But
Hmm.
and that in 1928 was the whole basis of a criminalization in the UK. How do we make sense of this? That once something is written into law, written into culture, you mustn't eat fish on a Friday. The
Yeah,
Catholics were doing that for centuries. No, oh no, or that's really, or is it you do eat fish on a? Oh, I get so confused about religious rules. Uh, um, that so many of these things are they're traditions. That
yeah. Well, the same sort of thing has happened, even more extreme with psychedelics, and they
yes,
have mixed potential, of course. But um, if you keep them all in the background, people are going to experiment anyways and not be able to use them for their best
mhm,
possibility. But what you said about education just a while ago is so important because we have all these classes about different subject matters for kids growing up. Is there one on human nature? Not that I've ever heard
or on
about. That ought to be
relationship. Yeah.
the number one class.
Mm-hmm.
There's a subject matter in it every year, and knowledge about what influences human nature and how we can achieve freedom of thought, but it's not there in education now.
No.
Just not at all. It's amazing.
No, I mean, for centuries, you had rhetoric as a central subject. And the idea was that rhetoric would teach you to analyze, break down ideas into their parts, evaluate, look at the value of the things, and articulate, be able to explain these things. It completely left the syllabus in this country in the 1950s because the only residue of it was the teaching of Latin, where you might read Cicero, the great logician. And so you have this pale attempt to return critical thinking, which is you can actually take exams in critical thinking in this country. There are lots of people, lots of websites teaching this thing. And my thing, for a long time, when I turned from helping people in recovery to, how do you get preventative about this? Because, an ounce of prevention is worth a ton of cure. Um,
Really?
Absolutely. So what is it that people need to know that will make them less likely to buy wooden nickels, as the American
Hmm.
expression goes?
Hmm.
And what do we teach about selling? What do we teach about advertising? What do we teach about political spin? What do we teach about the deceptions and lies? No, we teach you geography. You'll know what a watershed is by the time you're done. And you'll know that the Declaration of Independence, well, you won't actually, you'll believe that the Declaration of Independence was signed on the 4th of July. It was signed on the 2nd, actually. Whoops. Or that photograph of the flag going up was real rather than posed. And history, Mississippi of lies. But yeah, how to interpret information, how not to be grabbed up by the crowd and by the feelings of
Right.
hatred that I think I've said this before, but one of the really shocking thing I saw 5 or 6 years ago was in the US, people with megaphones yelling obscenities at each other from a yard apart, one side representing what in America is called the right, and the other side, what is called in America, the left.
Yeah.
Actually, it was confusing because the left guy was on the right side of the screen, so they just hadn't got it right. And of course, if you try and talk to somebody on the street about what they mean by right and left, they've got no idea. It's the and it's a false, absolutely false distinction because
Right.
there are policies of autocracy that belong to communism on the left and to fascism on the right.
Hmm.
Being kind to people, being considerate, and I mean the Mendota juvenile study that in the US in Wyoming, I think it was, where to which I often allude, they took one set of young offenders and gave them the usual treatment, and the other set they gave them therapy and support and encouragement. And in the follow up, I think there were 17 murders committed from the control group and none from and just letting people know you care,
Yeah,
just
that's so
rather
important.
than beating them and dragging them around and thinking you're going to, you know, if you don't kill somebody, they are going to resent what you did and they are going to hurt you later if they get any chance. It it's just not a way to live a life.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, how for parents to enhance the caring and
Mm.
compassion in children instead of the trauma and anger, to set up people to be able to do that as they grow, and of course continue that in school is just so important. You know,
Mm.
experiments like that are just so striking,
Mm.
but not necessarily followed up. So that's the task. You know, that's we
Yeah.
you've said before, we know what to do, but we don't do it very well yet. So
Mm. Well, I mean, I've been out here for 40 years unfunded, doing whatever I can, and I live from hand to mouth, with the support of my family, in fact. And what a ludicrous situation, um, that, I mean, if you do it properly, then there's a lot less harm caused in the world. There's a lot
mhm.
less damage caused in the world. The only way that we can live together is by living together, as long as the purpose of life is vendetta. You know, I was in, when the first Gulf War broke out, I was on my way to Reno, Nevada. I was in Bishop, California. And we
Oh
went
yeah.
into a store the day that the war was launched, after the Kuwait invasion. And this huge guy behind the counter, and there was a gun on the wall. We don't get that very much in my country, shotguns on the wall, you know, because
Yeah,
you're not
really.
allowed to. Um, and it's a huge guy, and he said, "What do you think about Iraq?" And once I translated that he meant Iraq, which is what
Yeah.
how we say it, I was sort of stumbling to find an answer, and my journalist friend Evan, dear man, managed to say something bland that got past him. And the guy looked at us and he said, "I think we should bomb those fuckers flat."
Hmm.
I'm kind of going, so you think that the cradle of civilization,
Hmm.
that where all of our, you know, all of our religions come from, the Hindu ones, the Chinese ones, everything comes out of Sumeria. You think
Yeah.
we should kill all the people there? Is there a particular reason for that, or is it because you've got hemorrhoids? You know, it's like, why do people, you know, why is there so much nastiness? And the failure to realize that if you do not completely annihilate your enemies, every last one of them, somebody is going to come and get you one day. Somebody's
Yeah.
going to have you back.
Yep.
And whereas if you are kind, yes, sometimes it's going to go wrong and things aren't going to work and you're going to get tricked instead of treated. But you've got some chance of
Right.
creating a decent human world rather than wasting money on ballrooms and missiles, you know.
Hmm. Exactly. Exactly. No argument there. Yep.
Grand. Well, let's conclude because, you know, we've worn our listeners down, ground them down to a pulp by now, I should think, you know.
Yeah.
Please, if you have managed to get this far, we do like to be liked. And about somewhere over half of the people that watch this channel don't subscribe. And it's helpful for us because we get, I think, 1 cent a month more in advertising revenue per person, you know. So, and Spike, you know, poor thing down there in the basement embroidering these videos so they can be released. She does need something. I don't take anything from this because why don't I take anything from this, Steve? Because I'm not very intelligent. That's it. I've worked it out.
Well, neither am I. You know, when people ask me, sort of what's your position now, assuming I'm going to say I work for the medical school or for this
Mm,
organization, I'm a pro bono private community psychiatrist, meaning I don't charge for
yeah.
anything, except there's one exception, if I'm an expert witness with lawyers,
Yeah.
because they're gonna just pocket the money if they don't pay me. So that's the only thing I ever
Mm.
charge for, which my wife doesn't like very much, but
Yeah.
gives me more freedom. I don't have to
Mm.
tailor certain things because of the payment involved.
Yeah, I mean, in my field, it's tremendous division that there are the, if you want to make a living, you do exit counseling and charge whatever amount of money. And I did some of that back in the early 90s. I did 4 years of that and decided it wasn't for me. Um, or I've seen, I don't know, and I don't do it anymore. I'm 70 now, I'm done. Um, but I've seen about 600 people and I've never charged.
Mm.
Three of them gave me money so
Yeah.
far. No, a fourth person actually gave me a couple of $100 this year. Um,
Yeah.
uh,
More should. Yeah. More should.
yeah, and so it has to be by by selling books, really.
Mm.
And I'm happy to report that we've doubled our book sales in the last 2 months since the new book came out.
Oh,
And
fantastic.
so I mean, I think that's almost 2 cups of coffee a day I can afford now.
Yeah. No, that's great. On, probably on the negative side, it reflects the need for the book, and because of what's going on in the world. But thankfully, maybe it's going to help people deal with underlying concerns.
Yeah, I mean, I
Good for
have
you.
focused entirely on trying to um, address problems. When I left Scientology and realized that I was one of the lucky survivors, that I didn't feel any damage, but everybody else I met, and I was appalled. There were deaths, there were ruined relationships, that a lot of
Yeah.
people who would be in debt for the rest of their lives as a consequence, and
Yeah.
people who suffered the moral injury of
Yeah.
which you spoke the last time we were
Yeah.
talking, that they'd participated in this
Yeah.
and been dragged along and weren't really sure. Yeah, they'd lost their agency.
Yeah.
Um, and so, for me, it was systematic. It was like, well, first of all, let's find out about the founder of this thing, Ron Hubbard. So I got into his biography in a deep way and helped Russell Miller write Barefaced Messiah, a wonderful book about Hubbard. What's the history of this group? How did it develop? So I wrote, Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky. Oh, there needs to be something for people who've never encountered it. Blue Sky was to help people kind of decompress from the experience mainly. So I wrote Scientology Cult of Greed for somebody who knows nothing about it, to take the worst elements of it. Then it was like, well, what are the psychological mechanisms here? And they apply everywhere. We're human beings. The same things happen. So I wrote
Yeah.
Opening Our Minds to put that out there. And now I want to look at simple idea that absurd beliefs can lead to atrocious behaviors. And by, in the new book, by looking at eugenic theory, Aryan race fantasy, how those Nazis who practiced magic, occultism, how that influenced many of our contemporary cult groups, many of them derived from this. You had the silver shirt movement under William Dudley Pelley, for example, in the US, which came directly out of theosophy. You have anthroposophy, which is in the tech pros are all sending their kids to Waldorf schools. This is happening in real time, that they're being indoctrinated into cult beliefs, which are
Mm.
pseudoscientific, which you'd think the tech pros would be a bit more intelligent than that, but they aren't.
Yeah.
They're as gullible as the rest of us.
Yes.
And so, I've focused on one issue after another, but what I don't have is a distribution network or a way of getting to the public, other than this here. This is starting to feel like the end of Peter Sellers' record, I'm oh so ashamed. Um, so, where he's singing as a 9-year-old, and he's saying, he's it's me, nobody's buying me records. It's been 3 weeks since I had a record in the top 20 pops. Me discs are slipping, and at the end he says, "Please buy this record, please." So please buy my book, please. It's
Yeah. It's
available in
like,
audiobook, ebook, as a t-shirt, as a pair of shoes, as a mug, as socks. No, it isn't actually, but it is available as an ebook, a print book, and an audiobook. If Scientology ruled the world, Nazi occultists, sex magic, space aliens, and the second coming. So I don't have
what,
to do interviews about
what
it.
could
It's
be
all in the
more
front.
interesting than that?
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Cats, knitting, and recipes, but I couldn't get them all in. So the next book's going to be that, though. Recipes
okay.
for golfing cats or something. I don't know. Anyway, forgive me. I've been watching too much I watched The Life and Death of Peter Sellers with Geoffrey Rush, which is what a brilliant film. So
Mm,
I've been watching documentaries about Peter Sellers and Spike Milligan, and what are you going to do? Keeps us
yeah,
going.
it's amazing. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you so much, Stephen.
You're
Always,
welcome.
always a
Thank you.
great privilege and a pleasure to talk with you.
Sounds good.
Cheers. Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much. Why are you
Yeah.
watching this? Why are you doing this to yourselves?